Hi folks, Jonathan here. During lockdown, one of my projects has been to do some research into the Echo building and the Upton area of Torquay. And so this is a brief progress report on my investigation so far. Now, the current lockdown restrictions mean that visiting libraries and archives is not possible. So I'm using online resources. And the first stage has been to look at the changing landscape around St James's Church, also known as the Echo building, as revealed by looking at maps of the area. But first, as you may be aware, the building began life as a mission house, the foundation stone being laid in March 1891 and it opened 7 months later. The mission house became a small church in 1910 when a separate parish of St James's was set up. There were plans to build a larger parish church, but after the Second World War and changing economic circumstances, these plans were shelved and the area reverted to being part of the parish of Upton, St Mary Magdalene. Now in 1965, some 50 years after being consecrated as a church, the building was closed and later sold, only of course to be acquired by the Together Church some 55 years after that. These two pictures of St James's Church were probably taken some 90 years apart, and it's noticeable that at some point the roof has been replaced so that it now has a shallower pitch and the tower has been removed. So where does Upton fit into the landscape of Torquay? The first usable map of the area is from 1661, which focuses on Tor Abbey, which is to the southwest of Upton. Chapel Hill, which is due west of St James's, is shown with the chapel that gives the hill its name. The chapel is still there, although somewhat derelict. The first proper map dates from 1765 and shows the area which is now Torquay was relatively unpopulated. In fact, the main settlement was around the abbey rather than the quay. The first Ordnance Survey map dates from 1809, and the area now known as Upton was named Upham on the map. Ham is an Anglo-Saxon word for a hamlet or village. Ton is an Anglo-Saxon word also meaning a settlement. I have yet to find an explanation as to why the name changed, although ton is often an abbreviated form of town, as in Newton Abbot, which was a new town founded in 1220 by the abbot of Tor Abbey, which itself, funnily enough, had only been founded 25 years earlier in 1196, so perhaps an early example of outreach in this area. This is an enlarged detail of the same OS map, showing how habitation was following the line of the road from Dazon down to Tor Maham, which is where the abbey is. Morham comes from the family name of the de Morhams, who owned this land from the end of the 12th century to the middle of the 16th century. This OS map dates from 1869, although it was actually surveyed in 1863, and we can now locate the future position of St James's Church in the red circle. I use the blue circles so I can scale the maps. They mark 2 road junctions that have kept their shape into modern times, although the priorities have actually changed. This is especially the case with the junction circled in the top left of the map. Cricket Fields is to the northwest of this junction and would appear to be much more of a crossroads in the 1860s. And the street that is now St James's Road was called Upton Road at this time. By 1887, when the 1889 OS map was surveyed, we can see that the streets around St James's are beginning to take shape as terraced houses are built. These contrast with the villas that can be seen to the west and to the east, which are considerably larger and in their own substantial grounds. That probably says something about the makeup of the population of this area at this time. This map was published about 3 years after the previous OS map and is basically a colorized version, but is somewhat sharper in its detail. This is the 1906 OS map and shows how in the previous 10 to 15 years the number of terraced houses has increased. The church or as it was then the Mission House, is now in the red circle, having been built in 1891. 30 years later, in 1937, and the number of houses in the area has grown considerably. The 1947 version of the OS map has a more simplified design and shows that very little has really changed, which is unsurprising when the country had been at war for some 6 of the previous 10 years. In fact, the 1960s OS map also reveals that little has changed, at least in terms of habitation and land use. And finally, this is the area as seen using the current Google Earth view. So from the maps we can see that the layout of Upton has been pretty much unchanged in the past 90 years. And as lockdown continues, the next stage of my research will be to look at the local newspapers in the British Newspaper Archive and also to look at the censuses. Meanwhile, if anyone has any comments or questions, do let me know. I will try and find answers. And if you want to look at the maps in more detail, I've included the web addresses in the captions. So, more to come soonish.